All right, so we're gonna hop into what I call AV2, which is availability, visibility, and viability. So that they break up into all those patterns. Like I mentioned, I've seen this work and we've got customers that are using it. So we'll kind of jump in and talk through those things.
So you mentioned that you've seen customers using this, it's successful. What does a successful VAR look like?
Good question. So going along with what I mentioned earlier in one of the other videos about having a strategy, if you can get your customers to sit down with you and plan a security strategy, not just here's the stuff I'm going to use, but hey, what is our risk profile? What segments are we in? What compliance initiatives do we have? Are we under certain regulations like Sarbanes-Oxley, HIPAA, NERC, FERC, Basel, whatever acronyms, soup you want to throw. There's some more acronyms for you. That's how we kind of look at that. So that's what success looks like for those. They'll sit down with those customers and act more as a consultative VAR for them, or not a consultative VAR, like more of a CTO or a CIO process versus, hey, I got a firewall, you want to buy a firewall? I mean, don't get me wrong, if a firewall's broke, sell them a firewall. But for a long-term strategy, it is about taking these pillars, as it were, and applying them to that strategy. And so they break down into several areas, and we'll kind of go through them, what that means. So in available, to me, that means having the right data available to the right people at the right times, right? And so for a network guy, that means 5 nines, right? 99.999% uptime. You want to freak out a network guy, tell me to take his network down. You'll get thrown out of the building, or torches and pitchforks. From a security standpoint, that means being able to get into the network by the right people. So when we're on trips, so like, we're out here in California this week, we VPN back into the office. And we're all familiar with that. What is VPN? Virtual private network, if you didn't know. But you can sit down at a hotel kiosk and go to a web browser and get back in. Well, that's authentication, which I'll go into. It says, who are you? I've got a username and a password, and I can get into the network. That's availability. I've made data available to trusted users from somewhere in the world, right? Firewall fits in availability as well, if you think about it. I want the bad guys on the big, bad, scary internet, and I want all my good stuff inside. And then I control more what comes in and out. Historically, firewalls especially, we were basically worried about the bad stuff coming in, right? And in the wild, wild west of the internet, way back when in 1997, which in internet time, as we talked about at dinner last night, is a million years ago, we didn't really care about stuff that went out, right? It's like, well, you just do your thing. That's a very different motion these days. We are concerned about what's leaving the organization. So we'll talk about DLP and CASB and some more acronyms and what those mean, how they play into things. The other thing that we'll look at are things like WAN optimization, encryption, and like I mentioned, like DLP and proxy, and when proxy and what those things are for availability. So lots of different things fit in availability, and depending on the vendors, some of them will fit in different places. And we've got some material on here, and I think there'll be a slide that you'll see on the screen here with me that talks about some of the different vendors in this space, kind of who fits in here. So there's things like SDN or SWN. So do you guys know what that acronym is?
I don't.
Okay, so you'll see it both ways. Primarily, you'll see it as SDN, software-defined networking. So what it is, you've seen people in here like Brocade does it with Viata or their OpenStack foundation that they sit on. OpenStack's in here, VMware's NSX, and some other players in there. What it is, they're taking the control part from switching and moving it into software. So traditionally, you guys are under, no route switch. You put a switch in, you have to configure that switch, right? You have to tell it what its IP address is, what its VLANs are, what its QoS is. QoS is?
I don't.
So QoS is,
acronym.
Yep, quality of service. So when we talk about on a network, we give voice priority over video. We give video priority over your email, because I don't care if your email is 5 seconds late, but we care about voice and video. So we prioritize those things. The challenge comes into when I've deployed thousands of switches across an enterprise network, are those consistent? And if I have to change something, I have to touch 1 switch, 2 switch, 3 switch, blue switch, as Dr. Seuss would say. With SDN, I can actually control that all from software. So the switches, in effect, become dumb.
Okay.
Right? So I can go plug a dumb switch in. It just basically goes back to the controller and says, what do I do? The controller says, oh, well, you're in marketing. You're a switch over here in this building. You get this, and this. So SDN does that. And you're seeing also a lot of the vendors that we use are playing in that space too. If you know, Jen, you guys work with Palo Alto, you've heard them talk about service insertions, or, you know, the Panorama instance with that. So what they're doing is we're loading Panorama and some virtual firewall instances within an SDN environment. So if I want to spin up 15 seats in accounting or 1,000 seats in IT, I can actually assign that profile automatically. It does a service insertion that the controller software says, oh, that's this security profile because I built a strategy some time back, and I can deploy a firewall automatically with certain rules, certain bandwidth profiles, certain parameters to do that. So SDN's a big play. We've seen a lot of motion around it. There's been a ton of buzz around it. We're starting to actually see it come to fruition. You know, VMware is a big player in that space with their NSX thing. Palo Alto Networks is heavily in that space as well. Fortinet's playing in there. Cisco's obviously in that space as well with some of their ACI stuff, but they also will play with NSX as well. One of the other things we talk about is in the availability space is like load balancing, things like that.
What does that mean, load balancing?
So load balancing is exactly what it sounds like from a network standpoint. So if I've got a bunch of like web servers in my office, you know, I'm in my data center, and I've got a lot of traffic coming at them, I can actually split that load amongst multiple web servers, right? So inbound traffic hits a load balancer from whatever company's F5's in the space with that. Radware does some load balancing as well. There's a lot of companies that do that. They take that inbound traffic and it will split it between multiple ones. So I might answer it at once, then you answer it, then you answer it, then I answer it, then you answer it, then you answer it, so it load balances. It also can provide for some fault tolerance. So in that same instance, if Kristen doesn't want to talk to anybody anymore, she's going to take her break, we would answer those questions while she was on her lunch break. The outside world doesn't know anything about it, but that's how that works. And that's also some fault tolerance. You know, when we talk about like fault tolerance and load balance, that's kind of how that works as well. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. So, you know, obviously then we talk about, you know, so firewall is the big one for availability, right? And we'll go into some more depth in firewall as well, but especially in the availability space, firewall comes up, and you'll see firewall, I'll talk about it in the follow-up segments with visibility and with viability. The firewall historically has been just about blocking bad stuff and allowing good stuff out, right? So I mentioned earlier, it was deny all, allow explicit from the outside in. You know, nothing gets in, but we'll allow some email. Yeah, we'll allow some web traffic, and we'll allow a few things to here and there. From the inside, meaning like your local area network, the default rule for years was allow any out. So if you were inside, you could go to the internet, do whatever you want. It doesn't really matter, we don't really care. And I say that somewhat flippantly, but that was pretty much the security profile of a lot of customers.
That seems really risky.
It's horribly risky.
A little bit.
So the downside is that, and you've heard some of us talk about like whitelisting and blacklisting, and beyond being a cool TV show, when you blacklist something, obviously it has its implications, right? You're off the list, you're not getting into the party, you're out of here. Whitelisting is far more difficult. So whitelisting is the idea that I have a list of, you know, think about like your bouncer at the club, right? You're in, you're out, you're in, you're out, you're in, you're out. The nice thing about humans is that no matter, by and large, what you're dressed like, I can tell who you are, right? You're Kristen, you're Jennifer, that's Ryan. I know who you guys are. You change your clothes, I'm still gonna know that. You wear a goofy hat, I might say your hat looks dumb, but I still know who you are. From a network perspective, that's a lot more difficult, because when you think about it, as applications update and change, they put on a new hat, it's harder to see what they are, right? We rely on things like cryptographic hash algorithms, MD5 sums, or you can do inspection of what is that thing, right? What is that process? And so it becomes a losing battle. You can't hardly whitelist anything. Well, we weren't able to whitelist things effectively in the past because there was no way. So most administrators, at the risk of not impeding the speed of business, would just say, fine, whatever. Just send traffic out because I'm getting yelled at by the boss, I'm getting yelled at by IT, I'm getting yelled at by legal, I'm getting yelled at by everybody because I can't send this to so-and-so. Fine. So we just let traffic out. Modern firewalls do layer 7 inspection or, you know, full traffic inspection. Everybody's got their different names for, you know, Palo Alto Networks calls it App ID. You'll see it called deep packet inspection or application control. You know, there's multiple different buzzwords for it. But what it really means is that now we have the ability at a network level to identify what that traffic is. Oh, that looks like Skype. You know, so Skype can change its hat, Skype can change its clothes, but when we look at it, we can say, you're still Skype. Conversely, the bad guys figured out if they ride the same port as a web traffic or the same protocol as mail, they'd be able to get in. Now we're able to look at it and say, yeah, you're dressed like mail, but you're not really mail. You know, this is actually malware underneath the covers. You look like a web server, but I can tell that you're not really a web server. So that's been a big change on those things, is looking more into that space. That make sense?
Yeah.
It does.